commercial-free Catholic Charismatic channel.
He's strengthening the faith of so many people.
To promote the gift of church teaching, dedicated for the new evangelization.
God's blessings on your work. May God bless and prosper you.
Shalom World, God's own channel.
Thank you very much. It's really nice to be back together as a group. And I really would like to sort of do a bit of wrap up to this series that we have been talking about. And we were looking at our life, Christian life, as a journey, but not an ordinary journey, but a gifted journey. And I really would like to sort of reflect a little on that. When Christ comes into our lives, at least two things happen. One is he opens the channels of grace into our lives. And the other is he influences our thought processes. Now, how does he open the channels of grace to us? We have what we call sacraments. Sacraments are like opening the channels of grace. Any of the sacrament we take in baptism, for example, we talked about baptism, Holy Eucharist, confession, and all that. All the sacraments are ways in which we open the channels when we attend it, and God opens from his side. And so a flow of divine energy comes into our lives, and it influences us to make the right decisions, to think the right thoughts, to carry out the right actions. I think there is another very important thing that happens to us, another very important process that goes on within us. That is, when we begin to focus on what Jesus has told us, taught us, our mental processes undergo some change. We begin to think different thoughts. And obviously we know, psychologists and others say, different thoughts is where different actions start. And therefore, these are two ways in which Christ influences our life, as far as I can see. What is one of the main benefits of Christ influencing our thoughts? I think it is our ability to make our life, to find meaning in our life, regardless of what the circumstances are. When we look at our lives, whatever circumstance, but together with God and the way Christ has told us about life, then we find a way to find meaning. Now, finding meaning is a topic that psychologists have studied. And I have quoted Viktor Frankl quite often in my talks. He is one who has had a profound influence on my life. And he has given us a very, I would say, simple formula to see how we can make our lives meaningful. He has given us three words. First is experience, second is creativity, and the third is attitude. And it is very good to look at his thoughts, because those things that he suggests become possible when we allow Christ to come into our lives. So what does he mean by experience? He says, your experiences are what? And mind you, he does not distinguish between pleasant experiences and unpleasant experiences. Regardless of how pleasant the experience is, an experience is life's gift to you. An experience is life's gift to you. Now, in pleasant experiences of success, of getting what we want and achieving our goals, purposes, it's easy to see how those are gifts for us. But what happens when an experience is negative, unpleasant, a sense of failure, and so on? That's where, if we can prove that it can be a gift, then we can accept this principle. Experiences are life's gift to you. Well, in unpleasant experiences, I often compare an unpleasant experience to a gift that arrives at our doorstep, but badly damaged on the way. And when we look at a packet that is arrived, now in the United States that doesn't happen because they're very careful about how they deliver packets. But go to my country, go to some other countries and see. When the packet arrives at your doorstep, well, then what do? You have two options. One is the wrapping is so bad, so I reject the whole thing. Someone else might say, well, the wrapping is bad, but a friend has sent it to me with love. So he picks it up, she picks it up, opens it, and oh, a beautiful gift. There is the gift inside and there is a wrapping outside. When we speak of an experience that is negative, I'm tempted to say, together with Viktor Frankl, that the gift is inside. What we need to learn is how do we deal with a wrapping that is unattractive? How do we succeed to open it up and to have the patience and the ability to stay with it until the gift that is inside emerges? It is really something that we need to learn. Now, in Christian teaching, is there something that helps us to have that patience, to help us to have that ability to open up the gifts? Well, think of the number of people in our tradition, in the Christian tradition for the last 2,000 years. How many people have witnessed to saying, looking at Christ on the cross, I was able to go through my suffering. Now, I don't have to quote any particular person, particular story. We have heard this so many times. We have seen this happen in our lives so many times. Each of us now can go back and say, oh yeah, I never expected I would get through that situation. It appeared so hard. And yet, when I prayed about it, when I spent some time to connect myself with God, I succeeded. Once again, I go back to what Jesus did, the Garden of Gethsemane. He was actually faced with that, the difficulty of going ahead to the passion. And his heart cried out. We spoke about it earlier in one of the segments also. His heart cried out like any human beings would. Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass me by. What did he do immediately? Stretched out his hands and said, but not as I will, but as thou wilt have it. So when we sort of stretch out our hand and allow God to touch our hand, this is what seems to be happening. And so in that process, what we are seeing is our experiences. When we discover the gift that is inside, the experience becomes gifted in our life. In other words, the journey that brought us that experience becomes gifted. We have, for example, the question of creativity. Creativity is rather good to think about. Creativity means I really I really try to come forward with some new solutions to existing problems. I'm creative, I think new, I become innovative in my life. There are many words that modern literature uses. When we come back from our break, I'm going to start with creativity and then to sort of suggest to you that is one way in which we can find meaning in our life. So when Christ comes into our lives, regardless of how tough they are, can be made meaningful. All right? So when we come back, we'll do that, okay? Yeah, thank you. So talking about creativity, it really speaks about innovation, it speaks about, but prior to that, it speaks about action. In other words, a Christian is one who acts. A Christian is one who actually does his or her part, never runs or shirks away from responsibility. And we all have our responsibilities in the personal sphere, societal sphere. We Christians are the ones who put our best foot forward and do what we need to do in order to get the results we want. And we are people also who do the actions in renewed ways, in innovative ways. Now, if we go back to the first chapter of Genesis, it's all about creation. We have a God who broke with where he was and what he was and decided to love reality so much that human beings had to come up. Now, people with different scientific theories will have other ways of expressing the same thing. We just go to the core of the message. And the core of the message is this, that when we yet did not exist, God somehow caused our existence to begin. And the biblical narrative is one of the ways of explaining that. But what we notice here is God was not afraid to create. He was not afraid to come up with something new from the old. And that becomes our model. And it is said that God created each and it was good. It means what? That means it fitted together, it fitted into the reality, and it enriched the reality. That's the model that we have. That's the kind of God who is in search of us. And therefore, we as Christians, we are people who engage in this very productive, creative action in the world. So what does it mean for us? I think it really puts on us a certain responsibility for the world. In fact, when we look at the world, we find it, in the biblical word used to subjugate the world. No, we have said that he subjugated what he found around him, but that word in English probably doesn't speak all of it. We nurture the world. We care for the world. We have to use the world in order to live, to survive, and so on and so forth. There is a mutual dependability in the world, and we are part of that chain. There's no doubt about it. But ultimately, we are preservers, and we are those who promote the world. We are those who safeguard the environment. So responsibility comes in the way we utilize the environment, what is in the environment for our purposes. So when we speak of creativity, there is much that comes into our spirituality. It is very different from a person who just says, well, I am just going through life. God has given everything to me. I make sure nothing is disturbed. No, it is not a question of nothing is disturbed. It's a question of, have you contributed something of your own? Because if we look at ourselves, we have these capacities for creativity. Starting with giving origin to life. God could have done it all on his own by definition. We don't know how he would have done it. But he shared that capacity with us. And he almost submitted it to our choices and decisions, which means he really wants us to be part of that program, to create, to come up with something new, to innovate, to keep the world progressing according to the plan that he has. That's the responsibility that we are talking about. So every time we can discover a way of being creative, that's the way to discover meaning to our life. And in fact, I have asked this of many groups that came to us for training. I asked, tell me one incident when you did something that was truly creative. And all these people, educators, managers, and from varieties of, they came up with so many different narratives. And my question to them was, at that moment, if someone were to have asked you, is your life meaningful? What would have been your answer? Absolutely yes. No doubt about it. Of course, young people are more creative. They have got greater visions. They have got dreams. They have got, that's true. But the whole point of the fact is, no matter how much we grow, we have to keep up our visions. We have to keep up this newness of life. And in the church, very often we talk about new life. I think new life is to be understood in this way of our desire to be creative. A third way in which we can find meaning in our life is attitudes. In fact, what Frankl says is, there may be situations where you really cannot change the situation. You can't, you don't have control over it. And so even if you try to change the situation, you might have wanted it, it may be good for the situation to change, but you cannot change it. What do you do in that case? Are you saying, oh, my life is finished, it cannot be meaningful? He says, no, you can change your attitude to it. Instead of saying, I am the victim, I cannot move a step forward, there is nothing I can do. Well, somebody else may say, yes, there is nothing I can do to change the situation, but rather than play a victim, I can become an active participator. I go into it, provided, of course, there is no moral objection to it. So if it is something that is beneficial to society and so on, I can elicit my self-transcendence, go beyond the limits of my own self-interest and say, I serve somebody. I serve somebody's cause, somebody's need. I give myself to a larger purpose. And in that way, what I am doing is, I am bringing about a change of attitude within me. So we have three different ways in which we can find meaning in life. Experiences becoming gifted. And Frankl says something beautiful about creativity. If experiences are life's gift to you, your creativity is your gift to life. So he's talking about life as a journey, but actually a gifted journey, a gift-giving journey. And finally, when it comes to some situation that I cannot handle, not within my brief, it's not within my possibilities, I change my attitude to make myself an active participator in a situation that is actually, good enough for me to participate. So this is really what happens when Christ comes into our lives. I would say, as Christians, as believers, as disciples of Christ, first of all, let us open ourselves to the channels of grace by approaching the sacraments and not get caught up with a lot of discussions that take place about who is the minister, what is going on. Those are not. We approach the sacraments. And secondly, allow the Christ's mind, the mind of Christ, to come and influence our thought processes so we can make our lives into something meaningful. If it is something meaningful, it is something beautiful. If it is something beautiful, it's a gift for the world. And I think that's the kind of wish that I have for you, regardless of what kind of status of life we have, whether it is whatever vocation we are following. But believing in ourselves and believing in Christ, we can reach this situation of making our lives meaningful and grace-filled. May God bless you. And so when we come back, we will share some thoughts that you might be having about what I have said. Okay? Yeah. We are here just to share some of our thoughts. And this time I'd like to start with a question. I'd like to ask a student from a college. How would people of your age like a spirituality that promotes action, that promotes creative action and involvement in the world, rather than all the time praying, let's say, for example?
No, I think that's really important. I know a lot of young people, especially around where I am, really seek to go and help other people and go to other countries. I think we feel very blessed in our own country, but we'd like to see it and help in other areas. However, oftentimes, at least at my age, when I hear creativity, I think of inventions, I think of science, I think of technology. And so there's kind of a gap there between spirituality and then that sort of creativity. So I think connecting that is something that really needs to be done in youth.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, thank you very much. And that's what we would like to see, our young people engaged more in really creative pursuits, action, coming out with lots of initiatives, new stuff, and so on. It's part of our spirituality. God did that with us, and so on. So that's the kind of way my thinking is going, and I'm so happy that you said that. Yeah, is there somebody else who'd like to?
Yeah, I know. We Catholics, we get the grace through sacraments. What about non-Catholics and non-Christians?
Yeah, very interesting. Yes, we get it through sacraments. But in a broader perspective, there are so many sacraments in this world we have not recognized. Any space where God is active, it is a sacrament because it's a sign. Sacrament means a sign, isn't it? And so when we look at it from that broad perspective, this world is filled with sacraments. It's the space becomes. And so I don't know, non-Christians also are coming under some possibility for them to open themselves to God's grace. I am sure it has happened in the past, otherwise how did they preserve themselves? So I think we are not doing any concession to them. We are just recognizing what God has been doing for them in His own way. Maybe we haven't understood it completely, but in His own way, He has been working with all human beings. Okay. Any other way in which, somebody else?
I have more of a comment, I guess, than a question, but, and I'm not sure just where it fits in today's talk, except that it's probably more in relationship to the changing that we can do of our own attitudes in dealing with difficulties through life.
Sure.
I'm remembering a very heartbreaking experience in my life. And it wasn't until I stopped trying to figure out why it had happened, and I'm assuming this was through God's grace, that I was able to move forward and end up with a very happy life.
Yeah. What I sort of see is probably you felt differently. Once you began to understand more why, you began to feel differently about the whole situation. In other words, attitudes changed and you were able to really respond to that situation.
Well, in this case, I actually never did understand.
Okay.
But I feel it was through my faith
Yes,
that I was able to move on
exactly.
and lead a very happy life.
Yeah. Great. Okay, wonderful. Who goes here?
Yeah, just a little comment about creativity. You talked about the environment influencing that creativity. So I'd like to make allusion to John Paul II's famous talk on the ecological conversion.
Yeah.
Now that humans, we need to learn how to take care of the environment. And unless we take care of that environment, we'll not be able to make use of that environment to be creative.
Yeah.
We need to conserve that environment, and in order to create something out of that environment.
Yeah, excellent. So beautiful. When I think of the environment question, I look at Jesus. We don't know where Jesus slept. We don't know where he prayed. But we know he went up into the hills to sleep and to pray. He was one with the environment. In the kind of, say, exhortations he gave, look at the lilies of the field, look at the birds of the air. They do not sow or reap, and yet your heavenly Father clothes them, etc. We know the phrases. He spoke about the seed and the tree. He spoke of the mustard seed, and he spoke of, he was there. He spoke of the farmer. He spoke of the wheat and the weeds. And Jesus, I mean, he was so one with the environment. And I feel so blessed that we, the church, we have begun to recognize the value behind that discourse. And it's really wonderful. I think we could really speak more about it. Thank you. Yeah.
Well, life is full of priorities, and our sort of life progresses as to how we prioritize our life. As we get a little older, faith and family are what there is at the end. That's the essence. But in the Bible, and Jesus talked about the following the will of the Father. And it seems to me that if we're able to prioritize our lives throughout this trip along that line, things kind of take care of themselves. And it's kind of becoming selfless and so on. Recognizing very clearly that we're fragile human beings and there are numerous distractions, but the journey, it is a gift. And as an old friend of mine once said, he said, he's never had a bad day.
Yeah.
But some are better than others. But always looked at each one as a gift and where he can provide some contribution.
Yeah, so that is really the wonderful thing, that we all have the possibility to turn our lives into gifts, to recognize the giftedness that already exists. And the other thing is, if we begin going in this fashion, then our life becomes a gift giving and gift receiving, because we are open to other people's gifts coming our way and so on. It's just a beautiful way of saying what life can turn out to be, etc. So anyway, it was really wonderful talking to you, talking with you all, sharing with your idea and so on and so forth. And maybe we can develop this idea of life being gifted in our life. My only wish is all of us, each of us in our own place and in our own circumstances, recognize the gifts that life is bringing to us, has been bringing to us always, and not get lost with one or two experiences that may not look immediately gift-filled. But we know for sure, if we unwrap it, have the patience for it, do it in God's company, we are going to discover a gift that's there. So that's my wish for all of you. I wish success and God be with you, and we will meet again sometime. Okay? God bless. Yeah.
Shalom Tidings. This is good news for a new generation. Discover God's constant presence amidst the hopelessness in our lives. Tiffany Layton writes about losing her young husband to horrific violence in Clinging to the Cross. God's grace showed Anne Noel how to be a merciful woman. Brother Manis Matus tells us why misery, pain, and suffering can indeed be a gift. Lisa Duffy shares her experiences in escaping the dangers of the divorce culture. Patty Knapp understands the infinite value of having a mass said, and so much more. Read about how God gives hope for the heartbroken in the February-March 2015 issue of Shalom Tidings. Visit shalomworld.org/tidings. Also available in Barnes & Noble stores,